This is part two of the presentation on colonial slavery. We just finished talking about the lower South, especially South Carolina. I'd like to look now at slavery in the North. Um, Black people, and enslaved or not, were a small part of the population there, with some exceptions, especially in New York and a few other areas. That is New York City, I mean. Um, Before about 1740, most of the slaves in the North were Creoles from the West Indies. And you remember from from part one, what Creoles were. These were Africans who spent time in the Caribbean or the West Indies before coming to mainland North America. Slaves were mostly scattered over small farms, no large plantations, no concentrations of slaves. So, because they were dispersed, they tended to learn the English language and English customs easily and quickly. It's a very different situation from slaves on the rice plantations of the lower South. Many of them were house servants. They did cooking, cleaning, child care, things like that. And they were often seen as status symbols by their masters. Um, Now, we know this in a very interesting way. If you look at the wills of people in the South and in the North, you find that slaves are listed in different parts of those wills. In the South, they're listed along with farm equipment. Uh, in the North, they're listed along with the fine jewelry and linens and things like that. Uh, Now, I don't pretend that this is pleasant to think about. This is ugly stuff here. But they are seen as property, and they are classed as in different categories of property depending on whether they're in the North or the South. This was a very creative idea by an historian who said, now how can I find out about this? What documents would survive? Well, wills, of course, had to be filed in county courthouses, and they survive so they can be examined today. And that's how historians were able to come to this conclusion. Now, after about 1740, there was a growing demand for labor in the North. Certainly, that was true in New York City, where there were a lot of dock workers in demand. Um, so, 70% of those who came as slaves after around 1740 came directly from Africa. Uh, and that once they arrived in the North, they scattered to many locations and they blended easily with the Creoles. So the two groups blended together. The Africans learned English quite quickly, and the Creoles were able to reconnect with African culture. So those were two effects that actually benefited both groups to uh, reconnect the Creoles with African customs and to help the Africans adapt to English society. But the two groups were lumped together by whites. Of course, that's stereotyping, which is very common in a society that has that kind of prejudice. Uh, there's an interesting custom uh, called Negro Election Day. That's the term that was used at the time, and it shows kind of the position that slaves had in Northern society. Negro Election Day was a custom that was carried over from Africa, in which the slaves, servants, would switch places with their masters for a day. They would be mayors, be, officials, just all sort of tongue-in-cheek, all lighthearted for one day, just as a sort of a custom, a festival. And this never would have been allowed in South Carolina or Virginia. Whites would have been terrified at something like this. But the fact that it did exist in parts of the North shows us that The numbers of slaves were lower, and whites were not threatened by the possibility of revolts there. Now let's talk a little about slavery in the Chesapeake. We've discussed this a good deal already, but there are a couple of more things to be said. Most slaves were on tobacco plantations, no surprise there. The plantations were self-sufficient, like towns, but they weren't really towns. They tended to produce, the larger ones especially, tended to produce everything that they needed to survive because they didn't have that many towns in early Virginia. There wasn't, remember I commented some time ago that there was a lot of economic growth, a lot of wealth, but not so much economic development, not so much infrastructure, things like roads and towns that would provide the basis for future economic growth. There was not a black majority in the Chesapeake as there was in South Carolina, but after Bacon's Rebellion, whites tended to lump all blacks together, and so the Creoles and the Africans were put in one group, and there was no sharp distinction between the two. Also, there was a lot more variety of work that slaves did because these plantations were self-sufficient and they had so many different tasks that needed to be done. Okay, let's talk about the plantation system versus the task system. I described the task system when we looked at South Carolina. The plantation system is the alternative to it. There is direct supervision by white overseers. Slaves were responsible as individuals. Each person was held accountable as an individual. And that meant that there would be whipping of individuals. This was a system that slaves hated, but it was used in the Chesapeake because the plantations were smaller than some of those rice plantations, and there was no black majority. So the whites who naturally were inclined to adopt a system like this felt that they could get away with it more easily. Now let's summarize the changes over time and place that apply to slavery in the colonial period. In the Chesapeake, before 1700, there were mostly indentured servants. We discussed that. And after 1700, the majority were African slaves. And of course, most of the explosive growth in tobacco took place after 1700. That is the really large-scale tobacco industry. It was growing rapidly before that, but by the time of the American Revolution, they were exporting 105 million pounds of tobacco a year. And the Creoles and Africans blended with each other in the Chesapeake. In the lower South, before 1700, it was mostly Creole slaves. After that, mostly African slaves, and the two groups stayed mostly separate from each other. In the North, the dividing line is 1740. Before that, it was mostly Creoles. After that, mostly Africans, and the two groups tended to blend together. So this is just a summary of how slavery varied according to place and according to time during the colonial period.